This is a book called Grace Beats Karma. It was written by Neal Cassady. Grace Beats Karma, Letters from Prison, 1958 to 1960. Has on the front cover a little bit of a promotion by Ken Kesey. The faith that saw him through his lapses had become a faith for everyone that knew him, a mighty bridge to see them across their own chasms. Just going to read, let you know a little bit about the background of this book. This is in the back of the book. It's Ken Kesey, or Neal Cassady. He was in prison for 2 years in San Quentin, and this is what led to that, to a degree. This is the official paperwork that was on file. Facts written by his probation officer. At the request of the San Francisco Police Narcotic Detail, the defendant was arrested at his home by the Santa Clara Sheriff's Office on a warrant charging him with violating sections 11500 of the Health and Safety Code. He was taken into custody on April 4th, 1958. An undercover agent testified that on January 27th, 1958, he gave the defendant $40 in the apartment of the co-defendant, Douglas Ferguson, for the purpose of obtaining marijuana. The offender was to leave for Los Angeles in order to obtain the marijuana. On February 28, 1958, the same officer, in company with a fellow agent in plain clothes, went to room 103 in the Elwoods Hotel, expecting to find Gordon Clayton. Instead, they were greeted by this defendant. In exchange for a ride to the Southern Pacific Depot, the offender gave the officers 3 marijuana cigarettes. So that's what he was arrested for. The more detail to explain what happened there was they were looking to get him. So an undercover agent approached him with $40 to buy marijuana. On that occasion, he was actually unable to find it for them, and he gave them back the $40. So on a whole different occasion, when they were looking to arrest somebody else, they ran into him at a hotel and gave him a ride to where he was working. And, well, let's go straight to his quote-unquote confession. This is the inmate's version. Personal history record taken from a lengthy excerpt on file. Minutes before 10 p.m. Easter Tuesday, April 8, 1958, I was arrested at my Los Gatos home by Santa Clara County Deputy Sheriff and charged with accepting on January 27, 1958, $40 from a San Francisco policeman and told Balmy for the purchase of some marijuana. 9 days later, in Judge Chaz Perry's municipal court, I was released outright, and my public defender, ROBT period, Nico, said, "Go home and forget about it." Next morning, however, when leaving home from work, two state narcotics agents arrested me on the same charge, plus a second, supplying Mr. Balmy and another officer, Wetstein, with 3 marijuana cigarettes in exchange for a ride, a mile or so to the South Pacific Railroad Depot, where I'd worked for the last 10 years as a train conductor. This later felony occurred at 10:30 a.m., February 28, 1958, and I pled guilty to such a quote-unquote sale before Judge Walter Carpinetti in the Superior Court. Compared to the prime truth, I can't help but constantly dwell on, namely, it's all my fault. Yes, my fault, mine alone, and main manifestation of same. Considered apart from many other more pertinent reasons for degradant causes, produced distorted effects such as incorrect motive and weak will, coupled onto too much time on my hands between daily train runs. Rested in foolhardishly frequenting bad company to indulge my even more foolish marijuana habit, and by so doing, I gradually drifted into some buying and selling of that evil weed. Yet I must remark, unmitigatedly though it be, This stupid vile traffic was merely meant to keep my own self supplied, and was most certainly not intended to make money, as Judge said he believed was the case. Well, there you have it, an honest confession of smoking and engaging in its necessary accompaniment of trade and barter, as witness my 3-cigarette gift to the police. So, as he stated there, he gave, it was a gift. He was offered to ride to the train station, and having already failed to give these same undercover agents marijuana the first time when he tried to get it for him, he felt he kind of owed him from that, because I've read separate accounts of the whole thing, explaining what the details were. So for 3 marijuana cigarettes, he went to prison for 2 years in San Quentin. But obviously there's more to it than that, because granted, this was the 50s, and yes, and even in the 50s things were more harsh on marijuana, but not that harsh. There was more to it because there was a book written in which Neal Cassady, under the guise of Dean Morarity, was written about by his friend Jack Kerouac. And Jack Kerouac went on to fame and was on TV shows and made money off the book he wrote. But Kerouac was a college graduate and therefore entitled to engage in such activities and write about such things. Where Neal Cassady didn't make any money off these things that happened. And that wasn't enough. The fact that in the books, because there were other authors wrote about him, he was sort of the one that they all looked up to because he was the grand adventurer, the one who actually did stuff. And although it's common for people to talk about freedom, especially high-educated people, to debate about what it means and how it's properly formed and how society can properly be structured for freedom, an adventurer like Neal Cassady actually lived freedom and became a sort of a symbol of it. Well, that couldn't stand to be the case. And it wasn't enough that not only did he not make money off these things that other people made money off of writing about him, he had to work a job, and he was raising a family. He had 3 children, and he, as it was stated, he worked as a train conductor for 10 years working a job. But his fame was growing, and it was talked about. Now, how widely it was talked about was the problem. It was a coast-to-coast thing. In these higher-up social circles, they were talking about this guy. Well, if this guy, who is not a college-educated person and has already been written about in books, gets passed down to generations, well, the common Joe, who's not college-educated, might suddenly think it's okay for him to go out and live some grand adventure. And if people start idolizing these non-college educated people and aspiring to be them rather than aspiring to looking up and idolizing the people that are given the degrees by the institutions, then all society could fall, could it not? Well, that was what they thought, apparently. So this man was taken away and spent 2 years away from his wife and his 3 little kids in prison, where he was able to write letters. Now, this book is not an easy read because so much of it has to be written about in code. These are only the letters that made it to his wife. And as he states in the book, many, many letters he tried to write were taken and torn up and were not delivered. When he was only allowed to write a certain number of letters, he was given 1 free envelope a week. Well, anyhow, while he wrote to his wife, sometimes a little bit embittered because there was an opportunity that if she was willing to put their house that he'd purchased, that owned, the Los Gatos home up for bond, he could potentially have gotten out. But the fact that she wouldn't do that was taken as proof that he wasn't a valued husband to her. And if his own wife didn't value his company, then that alone was proof that he deserved to be behind bars. So he carried a grudge to her, yet he did love her, and he hoped for a future with her after he got out of prison. And that's something she's written about in her own book, so we won't discuss that. But this is something I found very interesting, because even while locked up behind bars and confined to communicating with his children only through letters, he found a way to teach his children, even from that situation. Perhaps I'd have to say maybe teach them things that most fathers never teach their children. Here's an example. This was written primarily to daughter Jamie because it was her birthday, but it also has in parentheses also children Kathy and John too. While to most people, the only evident reason for composing, he's talking about, I should have stated, he's talking about nursery rhymes here. Mother Goose nursery rhymes. While to most people, the only evident reason for composing such ridiculous jingles is the simple amusement of children like yourself. Or do you still read them? Nothing could be farther from the truth, for actually they are the product of irate people of the 16th and 17th century England who, unlike we free in America, Englishmen, I say, who, unlike us in the U.S., get it, could not speak openly against the rulers and still keep their heads. I mean this literally. If I said figuratively, what would that mean? Can you guess? Ask Mother. Anyway, to stick to the subject, or at least to get back to it, it was through these clever verses that they found an effective outlet to their feelings. Because through them, the rhymes, you understand, that without using actual names but by substituting familiar characteristics, the people were able to ridicule kings, queens, and churchmen and still remain in one piece. Then, too, these verses told the news-hungry English secret tales of court scandals, high political intrigue, intricate religious strife, and sometimes grim tragedy. Therefore, we might truthfully say Mother Goose is actually a history book written by the common people. So, since in the coming school years this history will be one of your main studies, and I want you to enjoy it, I'm going to tell you the historical facts which prompted the rhymes you know so well, the important events disguised in these poetic lines you so easily rattle off without thinking. Ready? All right. Let's start with that favorite. Itself one of the very oldest, Humpty Dumpty, which effectively, though without concrete political results, for, being 1485, it was much too early for public opinion to do much more than scoff, lampooned that malformed hunchback, which was why he was called Humpty Dumpty, tyrant, who killed his two nephews to gain the throne, Richard III. The throne was the wall Humpty sat on and fell from after 2 years when, meeting his rival, Henry VII, in a clash on Bosworth Field, he lost his life at the War of the Roses, so called because the coat of arms of each had roses, one red, the other white. While dying, the evil Richard called to his men, a horse, my kingdom for a horse. But neither horse nor men could put old Humpty together again. A deserved fate, eh? So that's an example, and he goes on with other nursery rhymes there. And as I say, a lot of what's in this book has to be reread. He intentionally made it very difficult to read because I'm assuming so as the censors of the prison letters would just give up trying to figure them out, and hopefully his wife and children would be able to ponder over them and make them out. I gotta wonder if his children ever did fully understand some of these, because they were pretty complicated in their time. But anyhow, on a whole nother subject, I guess coincidentally, I'm the author of On the Road To, and it's the foreword to On the Road To is by Neal Cassady. I'll read that as well. On July 23rd of 1967, the Grateful Dead were playing a concert, and Neal went out on stage with the band playing in the background and did sort of a freestyle thing, which was a common thing that he did. It was called a rap, although rhyming wasn't necessarily so much a part of it, and it wasn't always accompanied by music, but sometimes was. And on this case, it was. And there came a part that really struck me, and I used it as the very short foreword to this book. Adam Christ, higher soul, help us out through, so the Cyclops don't win the unicorn brew. Neal Cassady, July 23rd, 1967.